Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Code Show. My name is Michael Zornick, and today we're going to continue building our conference app. In the last episode, we got our Xcode project started and got the table view in place and got some basic data working. We're now showing 3 of our sessions. They're fake data, but they'll good start. So today we're going to actually work on the custom cell design. So we've got a custom cell designed in Balsamiq. This custom cell has a title, a speaker name, and a room name. And so we're going to make our cell be able to do that. We're also going to keep in mind the kind of edge case, although common case, that the titles can be particularly long and may need to span multiple lines. So to get us started, actually let me make sure I go in here and commit what we did last week. Not last week, but last session. Alright, so now that that is all set up, I'm going to come back here to Xcode. And so we want to do a custom cell. Now, you have a couple choices where you can do that. One, you could design the cell inside of the storyboard. However, I generally like to do my custom cells inside of Zibs, primarily because if you want to use that custom cell across multiple storyboards, it just makes it a lot easier. Plus, in general, I kind of like to keep interface builder files as kind of focused as possible. And so even with storyboards, you'll find that I typically don't keep storyboards more than 5 or 6 screens. I try to keep them smaller. So to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file, and we're going to create a CocoaTouch class. And this is going to be a subclass of UITableViewCell, and the name of it, we'll just call it a session table view cell, and we'll ask it to create the zip file for us, which is kind of nice and handy. The language, of course, will be in Swift, and we will store this. For now, we will store it in the root of the project. I suspect we'll move it later, but we'll just keep it up here for now. Again, I'll delete a lot of the default trash that we get. Inside of our storyboard, or not our storyboard, but our Zib, you can see they've created a Zib with a cell that's already defined as our custom cell and is already using the style of custom. Okay, so we're going to get started in designing this cell. So this cell has 3 pieces of information. It has the title. Oh, no need for all caps. We're not shouting at anybody. It has the speaker, and it has the room. Now, I'm just going to stretch this to be really tall for a second, because if you refer to our design, you'll see the title can actually span the full width of the cell and should be able to be multiple lines. And so what we want to do here is we're going to drag a cell, we're going to position it here in the upper corner, and then we'll just drag it to be the full width. Then the speaker will be underneath that, and we're going to just follow all of the design guides that Apple provides us. If you're missing these blue lines, you can go under Editor, Canvas, Show Layout Rectangles, Hide Layout Rectangles, and that'll help you, visualize what's going on. So to make a title be able to have multiple lines, you'll want to change its lines attribute to 0, which means it'll take as many as it can. If you want to force it to just have like 3 or 4, you could do that as well. I'll let it be as long as it wants to be. And now we need to kind of add the constraints. So I'm going to bring up the pin window here. Let's just add constraints. I'm going to add a top and a leading and trailing. Notice I'm going to constrain to the margins, so that way it kind of utilizes the kind of safe area that's been designed for us. For speaker, I'm going to constrain that with the vertical to title, and then I want to constrain its leading edge to the leading edge of title, so that way it kind of forces it to the left here. Then room, same thing, vertical space, and then the trailing. So that way it's kind of off to the right. Obviously, using leading and trailing, if we were to switch this from a right to left language, that would swap them. Now, as far as the title's height goes, because the title is going to be multiple lines, and that's going to influence the height of the cell, we need enough constraints vertically to define the height of what the cell is going to be. So because title has one to the top and title has a natural height, and then we've got a spacer here, and we've got speaker has a natural height, we need one more to go to the bottom. So if I drag this and I want to create a constraint to the bottom, again, I'm going to create a constraint to the bottom container margin. So I'm getting this option by holding down the option key. And you'll see our line there. Now, if you double click this or you look at it in the inspector, you'll see it's 314. That's obviously not what we want. We would prefer it to be 0. And enter that, and all of a sudden, Interface Builder is freaking out because it's freaking out because it cannot satisfy these constraints at the moment. And the way we're going to fix this is we're going to go to the title, and inside of the attributes for this label, you can edit things like the hugging priority and compression resistance. And so what we want to do is change the hugging priority of, let's say, speaker to be higher than what it is, because we want the speaker to only be the height it needs to be. And by doing that, that kind of lets title take up the rest of the available space. Now, because the cell is this tall in design mode, it looks really tall, but my hope is by the time we're actually rendering this, if title's 2 lines, then it should take up only 2 lines. And look, probably something a little bit closer like this. So we'll use that, and we'll come back to our session list view controller. So how do you use this stuff? So what we're going to do is we're going to create a private function called configure table view. And inside of here, we're going to get our nib. And we'll get a reference to it by its name, and its name being session table data cell, and bundle will just be nil because that's kind of like the main bundle. And then we'll say table view. Now we don't have a reference to table view, which is a problem. So let's create that really quickly. I'll do it with the split view just to make sure everybody knows how that works. So if you have a storyboard and you've got your class you're working with here, you can decide to open up the assistant editor, and what that's going to do is show the storyboard on one side, and actually I'm going to scroll instead of drag it, and this will let you create like nice outlets and stuff really quickly. So actually let me bring this open here. So I want to create a reference from the table view to here, and this is going to be called table view. We do want to create a strong reference. That's kind of Apple's newest recommendation because of the way things like stack view and things can take stuff in and out of the view hierarchy. But we'll create it there. Then you have your choice of keeping it as an explicitly unwrapped optional, or you can convert it to an optional itself. You also have the option of hiding it. So if you don't want other people to see it, you can leave it private. So that way people outside of this view controller can't actually access it. So I'm actually going to convert it to an optional and mark it private for now. And then inside of our configuration, we want to register this nib for a cell use re-identifier. So we'll register nib, and we're going to use the same string for the reuse identifier. And let's get back to a full screen editor just to make this a little bit easier to see. And so we have our nib, we registered it, and now when we are pulling it from the reuse queue, we will ask for session table view cell. And we have not configured it yet. We haven't built the outlets to it yet. So we'll come in here. And this is, you have a decision at this point. I'll open up the assistant area so we can do the same outlets, and I'll explain while we're doing this. So you can, if you like, create outlets. And this will be title. This will be, I should say speaker label, and this is room label. I like to use the word label after so it's very clear what is being attached. And so here, I'm gonna oh no, I'll refactor it. I know, I'll do it by hand. So I'm gonna rename it label, and if you do this by hand and you try to run your app, you're actually going to run into a problem because it's going to have an outlet in the zip file that points to title, which doesn't exist anymore. So I'll delete that and then manually reassign our outlet there. But as I was saying, when you're doing this kind of stuff, you have choices of, when you create a cell, you can create these labels and outlets and have the user of this custom cell have access to the outlets and then kind of define the content for each outlet explicitly. Or in this case, like if this cell is kind of backed up by a model, you could instead say, here is my model, set that, and by setting the model, that instead will put all the data inside of the labels. And there's pros and minuses to each kind. Obviously, if you create a cell that is more generic, it's nicer to kind of expose the labels. But if you're going to have a cell that has lots of parts to it, and the cell is really about visualizing a specific model, sometimes it's nicer just to hand it that specific model. The negative of that, of course, unfortunately, is that like you're creating these kind of deep nested relationships. So if this model were to change, you'd have to change in multiple parts of the system. And one of the ways you can get around that is you can create representations or things like view models. So that way, instead of asking for a reference to session, you could instead maybe just ask for a session view model. And that way, the view model is explicitly just cares about the title, the speaker in the room, doesn't really care about all the other aspects of session. So if session had to change later, the view model wouldn't need to. All right, so to make this work, we are going to create a did set. We'll just say update UI, and then we'll create a private function called update UI, and this is going to do what you think it's going to do. It's going to assign all of the values to the appropriate label. All right, so I filled out update UI. It also knows I changed the explicitly unwrapped optionals to true optionals. This kind of makes things a little bit safer, just because if this cell were to not be backed up by its zip file, when you access it, it wouldn't fail. It would kind of fail silently instead of crash, which crashing, of course, is kind of like the ultimate sin. So there's an argument that that's better. Notice too that we're hitting a moment now where we've called something room label, and then we've got something called room location. Anytime you start to see differences in kind of verbiage, that's kind of a smell. I'm not going to touch it now, but it's probably something we'll come back to. All right, so with our cell designed and it's having access to update UI, let us now. So inside of table view, it's going to dequeue a reusable cell with identifier. Now the return type for this is still, I wish it wouldn't. Yeah, unfortunately, we're not getting our compiler help at the moment. it's a UITableViewCell, and so I can't add the session directly until I cast it. And so what I'll do here is I'll say let session cell equal cell as a session table view cell, and I will make this if let. So this is saying if I can cast the cell as a session table view cell and store that in session cell, do this, and this is going to be where I can actually assign the session, and then the session will fill out all the UI. I can delete that right there. All right, cool. I think that's all we need. So I'm gonna hit stop and play, and let's see what we got. All right, we have a crash. Let's see what the crash is. Must register a nib. So again, I've fallen for it. The old create configure method, but not call it. So I've created this wonderful method called configure table view, and I never called it. So we'll add that. We'll hit stop. We'll hide the console, and we'll play one more time. So we've got our cell design, and it looks like it's starting to come together. They definitely look a little bit taller than they normally do. But it doesn't kind of prove all of my fallacies. So we're going to do a couple more changes here before we finish up. The first one is we're going to add a new session, and this session is going to have a really long title. So we'll say a really long session title to test out multiple lines of text in the table. Why not? That'll be many. That'll be all Z. And the next thing I want to do is just a quick little update to add the styling. So in our design, title was bold and room name was a little blue. And so we're just going to add that really quickly. Where title will instead of regular be bold. And room is going to have a kind of aqua style look to it. Cool. All right, so let's stop and play. Oh, gotta add in my S4 because I initialized it, but I never used it. And we'll try that one more time. So now we've got our styled cells. So we've got bold titles and blue ballrooms. And look, we've got a really long title, and it's making the table view cell as tall as it needs to be to actually fill that, which is great. Now, one other thing we can add before we finish is by this default, so this automatic cell row height is something that you get kind of for free with the newer configurations of TableView. But if you're utilizing it, it's kind of nice to assign a estimated cell height. So if you look here, so if we look at this, if we make this kind of as small as it's can be without being red, you can see it's got currently a height of 75. That's probably right there. 72 looks to be about what it'll be with a native, just like a one-line title, and that's probably going to be the default height for every one of them. So what you can do is you can come in here, and when you're setting up your table view, you can tell the table view its estimated row height is going to be 72. And what it's going to do there is it's going to use that information to determine the scroll bar. So I don't have an excessive list here, but if you did, you would see this little scroll bar on the side, and the height of that scroll bar kind of indicates the amount of content you actually have to scroll. And it would be very expensive for the table view to calculate the height for every cell it's going to build. And so this estimated row height helps to kind of inform that user interface, indicator of like what it should be. So if you're doing dynamic cells, that definitely helps the system out a little bit. Cool. All right, so we've accomplished a lot today. We've built custom cells that not only are custom and stored in zibs, but they also support multiple lines of text, which is something that's really nice. And in the next episode, we're going to continue to evolve this, probably starting to introduce things like date and times, so we can start to break these out into a proper schedule. Until then, I want to thank you guys for watching and your support. And if you have any feedback, let me know. And I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.